Get that filthy half-breed out of my sight before I have her whipped for insolence!" The words echoed through the marble halls of the Silverstone Palace, and Morella felt every eye in the throne room turn toward her. Her arms tightened protectively around the bundle she carried, a tiny infant wrapped in threadbare linen, no more than 3 days old. The child whimpered against her chest, and Morella's heart cracked open with a fierce, desperate love she'd never imagined possible. She'd known this would be dangerous. She'd known that bringing an abandoned pup into the presence of Alpha King Thaddeus Blackwater would likely mean her death. But what choice did she have? The note pinned to the makeshift crib had changed everything. "Please," Morella whispered, her voice barely audible over the jeering crowd of nobles who lined the great hall. "Please, your majesty, if you would just read the—" Silence! The king's chief advisor, Lord Vexmont, descended the dais steps with murder in his eyes. He was a rail-thin man with a perpetually sour expression, and he'd hated Morella from the moment she'd arrived at the palace 6 months ago as a kitchen servant. "You dare interrupt the Alpha King's morning court with your pathetic sob story? Guards, remove this Omega trash immediately." 2 palace guards moved toward her, their hands already reaching for the clubs at their belts. Morella stumbled backward, her bare feet slipping on the polished floor. She'd been working the overnight shift in the kitchens when she'd discovered the infant tucked into a wooden crate behind the meat cellars. The note had been pinned to the child's wrappings with a silver pin. Old, tarnished, but unmistakably bearing the royal seal. She'd barely had time to read the hastily scrawled words before her supervisor had come looking for her. Now, standing in the throne room with her stained apron and unwashed hair, Morella knew how she must look to these pristine nobles in their silk and jewels. She was nothing. A half-breed Omega without a pack, without a family, without even a surname to call her own. But this child? This innocent baby who'd done nothing wrong except be born. Someone had to speak for him. "Wait!" The single word cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Every person in the throne room froze, including the guards who'd been seconds away from dragging Morella out by her hair. Alpha King! Thaddeus Blackwater rose from his throne, and Morella's breath caught, despite her terror. She'd seen him before, of course. Everyone who worked in the palace caught glimpses of him, but never this close, never with his full attention focused on her like the beam of some terrible spotlight. He was devastating. There was no other word for it. Even through her fear, Morella couldn't help but notice the way his black silk shirt stretched across shoulders that seemed impossibly broad, muscles rippling beneath the fabric with each movement. His chest was a wall of sculpted power, and his arms. She could see the defined curves of his biceps even through his sleeves, each one easily the size of her thigh. He stood well over 6 feet tall, making everyone else in the room seem small and insignificant by comparison. But it was his face that truly captured her attention. Chiseled masculine features that could have been carved from granite, high cheekbones, a strong defined jawline covered in dark stubble, a straight nose that had probably been broken at least once. His hair was thick and dark, tousled in that perfect, untamed way that made him look like he'd just rolled out of bed after thoroughly ravishing someone. And his eyes. Gods, his eyes. They were amber, not just gold, but genuine amber, like honey held up to sunlight, and they glowed with an inner fire that marked him as one of the most powerful alphas in the realm. As he descended the dais steps, she caught glimpses of his true nature. His canines were slightly too long, extending just past his upper lip. His ears came to subtle points, barely visible through his hair. And his hands. When he gestured for the guards to step back, she saw the slight curve of claws where normal fingernails should be. He was the perfect blend of man and wolf, radiating raw, primal strength and dominance that made every instinct in Morella's body scream at her to submit, to kneel, to bare her throat. She forced herself to remain standing, for the baby's sake. "You claim this child needs my attention," Thaddeus said, his voice a deep rumble that resonated in her chest. "You burst into my court covered in goddess knows what, clutching a mewling pup, And you dare demand that I, the Alpha King of the Northern Realms, stop everything to deal with your problems. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. Yes, Morella said, and was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Because this isn't just any child, Your Majesty. And these aren't just my problems. They're yours! The throne room erupted in outraged gasps and angry shouts. Lord Vexmont's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "Insolent Omega!" he shrieked. "How dare you suggest that the Alpha King has anything to do with your bastard whelp? Guards, I want her in the dungeons immediately. 50 lashes for her impudence." But Thaddeus held up one hand, and silence fell again like a curtain. His amber eyes never left Morella's face. "Explain," he commanded, "and choose your words carefully, little Omega. Your life depends on them." Morella swallowed hard. The baby in her arms had gone quiet, as if he too sensed the gravity of this moment. With shaking hands, she reached into her apron pocket and withdrew the note. "I found him this morning, Your Majesty, before dawn. Someone left him in the lower kitchens in a wooden crate, with nothing but these rags and this note." She held out the crumpled paper. "It bears the royal seal, and the message, I think you need to read it yourself." For a long moment Thaddeus didn't move. Then he closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was right there. So close she could smell him. Pine and snow and something wild and untamed that made her head spin. He plucked the note from her trembling fingers, careful not to touch her skin, and unfolded it. Morella watched his face as he read. She'd memorized the words in the few seconds she'd had to scan them. "Your Majesty, this child is your nephew, the only surviving son of your brother Dane. His mother was killed 3 nights ago by those who seek to destroy your bloodline. They are coming for the boy next. I cannot protect him. Only you can. The birthmark on his left shoulder will prove his identity. The Blackwater Crescent. Save him, and you save the future of your line. Fail, and the prophecy dies with him. A friend you've forgotten." The color drained from Thaddeus's face. His hands began to shake, and Morella saw his claws extend fully, puncturing the paper. When he looked up, his eyes were glowing so brightly, they looked like twin suns. "My brother has been dead for 3 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dane died in the border wars. His body was returned to me. I burned it myself." "Perhaps he wasn't as dead as you thought," Morella said softly. "Or perhaps he lived longer than you knew. Either way, this child exists. And if the note is correct, he's in terrible danger." "This is clearly a trick," Lord Vexmont interjected, hurrying down from the dais. "Some pathetic Omega's ploy to curry favor with your Majesty by playing on his grief. I say we execute her now and be done with this charade." But Thaddeus wasn't listening. He was staring at the bundle in Morella's arms, with an expression of such raw, desperate hope that it made her chest ache. "Show me," he commanded. "Show me the child's shoulder." Morella hesitated. The throne room was packed with courtiers and nobles, many of whom would love nothing more than to see the Alpha King humiliated. If this turned out to be a false alarm, if the child was just some random orphan, and she'd gotten Thaddeus's hopes up for nothing. But she'd seen the birthmark herself. She knew what she'd found. Carefully, she adjusted the baby in her arms and pulled back the linen wrapping to expose his tiny left shoulder. There, dark against his pale skin, was a crescent-shaped mark about the size of a thumbprint. It looked almost like a tattoo, except Morella knew it was natural, a hereditary marker that appeared on every member of the Blackwater royal line at birth. The throne room went completely silent. Thaddeus reached out with one trembling hand and touched the mark with the tip of his claw. The baby stirred at the contact, opening his eyes. Amber eyes, Morella realized with a start. The same shade as Thaddeus's own. "Gods above," the Alpha King breathed. "It's real. He's real." And then, to Morella's absolute shock, the most powerful Alpha in the realm dropped to his knees in front of her. "Give him to me," Thaddeus said, and it wasn't a command this time. It was a plea. Please, let me hold my nephew." Morella carefully transferred the baby into Thaddeus's massive arms. The contrast was almost comical. This tiny infant cradled against that enormous muscled chest, held in hands that could crush stone but were now gentle as a whisper. Thaddeus bent his head, his dark hair falling forward as he breathed in the child's scent. "He smells like Dane," the Alpha King said, his voice cracking. "Gods, he smells exactly like my brother." A single tear traced down his cheek, and Morella felt something twist in her chest. This was grief, she realized, raw and fresh despite 3 years of supposed healing. Thaddeus had never truly recovered from losing his brother. "What's his name?" Thaddeus asked, looking up at her with those burning amber eyes. I don't know, Your Majesty. There was nothing else with him except the note. Then he needs a name, a proper name, worthy of the Blackwater line." Thaddeus stood, still cradling the infant against his chest. When he turned to face the throne room, his voice rang out with absolute authority. "From this moment forward, this child shall be known as Kieran Dane Blackwater, nephew to the Alpha King and heir to the Crescent Throne. Anyone who harms him, threatens him, or speaks against him will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" The assembled nobles mumbled their assent, though Morella could see the calculation in many eyes. A new heir changed everything in the palace power structure. There would be schemes and plots before the day was out. But then Thaddeus turned back to her, and Morella forgot all about the scheming nobles. "You saved him," the Alpha King said. "You found my nephew, and instead of ignoring him or leaving him to die, you risked your own life to bring him to me. You stood before this court knowing you might be executed, all to protect a child who means nothing to you." "Why?" Morella blinked, confused by the question. Because he's innocent, Your Majesty. Because he needed help, and I was there. What else would I do?" Something shifted in Thaddeus's expression. His eyes roamed over her face as if truly seeing her for the first time. "What is your name, little Omega?" "Morella, Your Majesty. I work in the kitchens." "Not anymore." Thaddeus turned to address Lord Vexmont, who looked like he'd swallowed something rotten. "Morella will be promoted immediately to the position of royal nursemaid. She will have full responsibility for Kieran's care and upbringing. She will be given apartments in the royal wing, a suitable wardrobe, and whatever resources she requires. Anyone who interferes with her duties or treats her with disrespect will be banished from court. These are my orders, and they will be obeyed without question." The throne room erupted in chaos, nobles shouting over each other, some outraged, some confused. Lord Vexmont looked like he might have an apoplexy right there on the marble floor. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular," the advisor protested. "She is a half-breed Omega with no training, no education, no proper background. You cannot possibly—" "I can, and I have." Thaddeus's voice cracked like a whip. "This Omega showed more courage and compassion in one morning than most of this court has shown in a lifetime. She will raise my nephew, and that is final. Now get out. All of you, I need to speak with Morella alone." The nobles fled like mice from a cat, even Lord Vexmont retreating with as much dignity as he could muster. Within moments the throne room was empty, except for Morella, Thaddeus, and the baby Kieran. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Thaddeus gestured to the dais. "Come, sit. You look like you're about to collapse, and we have much to discuss." Morella's legs were indeed shaking, she realized. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was wearing off, leaving her light-headed and weak. She followed Thaddeus up the steps and sank gratefully onto one of the cushioned benches near the throne. "I need you to tell me everything," Thaddeus said, settling beside her with Kieran still cradled in his arms. "From the beginning. Where exactly did you find him? What time? Did you see anyone suspicious? Any detail could be important." So Morella told him. About finishing her shift kneading bread dough at dawn. About going down to the cold storage to fetch more flour and hearing a soft cry that she'd first thought was a cat. About finding the wooden crate tucked behind a stack of meat barrels and the shock of discovering a newborn infant inside. The note was pinned to his blanket with this, she said, producing the tarnished silver pin she'd tucked into her other pocket. I recognized the royal seal immediately. I knew this had to be brought to you right away, no matter what it cost me. Thaddeus took the pin, examining it closely. His expression darkened. This is from the old guard, he said quietly. These pins were given to my father's most trusted advisors 50 years ago. There are maybe a dozen still in existence. He looked at her. Whoever left this note wasn't just a friend I've forgotten. They're someone from the old regime, someone who's been around since before I was born. Could it be a trap? Morella asked. Some way to hurt you by hurting the child? Possibly. Probably even. Thaddeus looked down at Kieran, who had fallen asleep in his arms. But the birthmark is real, and his scent. Morella, I would know my brother's bloodline anywhere. This is Dane's son. Which means somewhere, somehow, Dane survived long enough to have a child. His voice broke on the last word, and Morella acted on instinct. She reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on Kieran's back. Then you'll protect him, she said firmly, and you'll find out the truth. That's what Alpha Kings do, isn't it? Protect their pack and seek justice. Thaddeus stared at her hand on his, and Morella suddenly realized what she'd done. She'd just touched the Alpha King without permission. That alone could be grounds for punishment. She started to pull away, but Thaddeus caught her hand, his clawed fingers curling around hers with surprising gentleness. Thank you, he said softly, for everything, for finding him, for bringing him to me, for giving me back the only piece of my brother I have left. The gratitude in his voice made Morella's throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the sleeping infant between them. Then Kieran stirred and made a small, hungry sound, and the spell broke. He'll need feeding, Morella said, reluctantly pulling her hand back. And proper clothes, and a safe place to sleep. If someone really is trying to kill him, we need to secure the nursery immediately. We, Thaddeus repeated, and something like approval flickered in his amber eyes. I like that. You're already thinking like his protector. Well, you did just make me his nursemaid, Your Majesty. Thaddeus, he corrected. When we're alone, call me Thaddeus. If you're going to be raising my nephew, we're going to be spending a great deal of time together. We might as well dispense with excessive formality. Morella's eyes widened. Alpha Kings didn't invite servants to use their given names. It was simply not done. I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will. Thaddeus stood, still cradling Kieran with practiced ease. Come, I'll show you to your new apartments. Then we'll send for a wet nurse and whatever supplies you need. Tomorrow we'll begin investigating who left this note and what happened to Dane. But tonight, he looked down at the sleeping baby. Tonight, we just keep him safe. Morella followed Thaddeus through the palace corridors, her mind reeling. Just this morning, she'd been a nobody. A half-breed kitchen omega that most people looked through rather than at. Now she was walking beside the Alpha King, being entrusted with the care of his only heir. The apartments Thaddeus showed her to were beyond anything she'd imagined. 3 rooms including a bedchamber, sitting room, and a nursery already furnished with a beautiful carved cradle. The sitting room had actual windows overlooking the palace gardens, not the narrow slits that let in barely any light in the servants' quarters. This is too much, Morella whispered, turning in a slow circle. Your Majesty, Thaddeus, I'm just a kitchen worker. I don't deserve. You deserve far more than this. Thaddeus laid Kieran gently in the cradle, which had been made up with soft blankets. The baby settled immediately, apparently content. Morella, do you know why I believed you? Why I accepted your story so readily when I could have had you executed for bringing a strange child before me? She shook her head mutely. Because I saw no fear in your eyes, no calculation, no attempt to manipulate or deceive. He moved closer, and Morella had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was so tall, so overwhelming, radiating heat and power. You weren't thinking about yourself at all. You were only thinking about protecting an innocent child. That kind of selflessness is rare, especially in this court. It's precious, and I'm not going to let anyone destroy it." His hand came up, and Morella held her breath as he gently touched her cheek with the back of his knuckles. His skin was warm, slightly rough, and the careful way he touched her, so aware of his own strength and her fragility, made something flutter in her chest. "Stay here tonight," Thaddeus said quietly. "Keep Kieran safe. I'm going to post my personal guards outside your door. Tomorrow we begin figuring out who killed his mother and why. But right now, you need rest. You've had a traumatic morning, and you're about to begin the most important job in the kingdom." "What about you?" Morella asked. "Will you rest too?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she would care. "Eventually. First, I have some old records to dig through. If Dane survived the border wars, there will be evidence somewhere. I just have to find it." He stepped back, breaking the contact between them. "My chambers are just down the hall. If you need anything at all, send one of the guards for me immediately. I don't care what time it is." Morella nodded, her cheek still tingling where he'd touched her. After Thaddeus left, she stood in the center of her new sitting room, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she'd been nobody. Now she was nursemaid to the royal heir, living in apartments that were nicer than anywhere she'd ever dreamed of staying. But more than that, and this was the part that scared her most, she'd somehow captured the attention of the Alpha King himself. The way he'd looked at her, touched her, spoken to her. It wasn't how Alphas typically treated lowly Omegas. It was how they treated equals, or potential mates. Morella shook her head sharply. She was being ridiculous. Thaddeus was grateful. That was all. He'd just been reunited with his brother's child. Of course he was being kind to the person who'd made that reunion possible. But even as she thought it, she remembered the warmth in his amber eyes, the gentleness of his touch, and something in her chest ached with a longing she didn't dare name. Kieran whimpered from his cradle, and Morella pushed all thoughts of the Alpha King aside. She had a job to do, and she would do it with everything she had. This innocent baby deserved protection, stability, and love. Everything else would have to wait. The wet nurse arrived within the hour, a kind-faced Omega named Thessaly, who came from a reputable pack and had recently lost her own infant to fever. She fed Kieran with practiced efficiency while Morella looked on, learning. "He's healthy," Thessaly pronounced after the feeding. "Good lungs, good appetite. Whatever he's been through these past few days, it hasn't harmed him too badly." "Can you tell how old he is?" Morella asked. 3, maybe 4 days. His cord stump is still fresh." Thessaly's expression softened as she looked at the drowsy infant. Poor little thing, to lose his mother so young. But he's lucky the Alpha King has him now. His Majesty will move heaven and earth to keep this one safe, I'd wager. Why do you say that? You didn't know him before, did you? Before Prince Dane died? Thessaly settled Kieran back in his cradle and began tidying up. The Alpha King was different then. Warmer. He smiled more, laughed more. But when his brother fell in the border wars, something in him broke. He became colder, more distant. He threw himself into ruling, but took no joy in it. Some said he was waiting to join his brother, that he'd lost his will to truly live. Morella thought of the tears she'd seen on Thaddeus's cheeks when he'd first held Kieran. The crack in his voice when he'd said the baby smelled like Dane. "And now?" she asked quietly. "Now?" Thessaly smiled. "Now he has a reason to live again. A piece of his brother to protect and love. Mark my words, girl. That baby in that cradle just saved the Alpha King's life as surely as the Alpha King will save his." After Thessaly left with instructions to return for the next feeding, Morella sat in the chair beside Kieran's cradle and simply watched him sleep. In the soft lamplight, she could see traces of Thaddeus in the baby's features. The strong jawline that would develop as he grew, the thick, dark hair, those unusual amber eyes. Whoever Dane had been, he'd clearly carried the Blackwater bloodline strong. A soft knock on the door made Morella jump. One of the guards poked his head in. "Begging your pardon, miss, but there's a package here for you. His Majesty sent it up from the royal seamstress." The package turned out to be 3 large trunks full of clothing. Not servants' clothing, but fine dresses in soft wools and silks, undergarments, sleeping gowns, even a warm cloak. There were shoes, too, real shoes with leather soles, not the worn-out canvas slippers she'd been wearing. A note was tucked into the top trunk in Thaddeus's bold handwriting. "You cannot care for royalty while dressed in rags. These should fit well enough for now. We'll arrange for proper fittings tomorrow." Tea. Morella ran her fingers over the soft fabric of a deep green dress, blinking back sudden tears. She couldn't remember the last time someone had given her something new. In the pack where she'd grown up, half-breeds like her got cast-offs and leftovers. In the palace kitchens, she'd owned exactly 2 changes of clothes, both patched and stained. This was too much. Too kind. She changed quickly into one of the sleeping gowns, soft ivory linen that actually fit her properly, and crawled into the bed. It was easily the most comfortable thing she'd ever laid on, with a real mattress and feather pillows and blankets that didn't scratch. But despite her exhaustion, Morella found she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the day's events, the moment she'd found Kieran, the terrifying walk through the palace to the throne room, Thaddeus's face when he'd first seen the birthmark, the gentleness in his hands when he'd held his nephew, the warmth in his eyes when he'd looked at her, and that touch on her cheek, that careful, reverent touch that had made her feel, just for a moment, like she was something precious. Morella pressed her hand to her cheek, remembering. Then Kieran made a small sound from his cradle, and she was up immediately, checking on him. He was still sleeping peacefully, just shifting in his dreams. She stood there for a long moment, looking down at him in the moonlight that streamed through the window. "I'll keep you safe," she whispered. "I promise. Whatever it takes, I'll protect you." It was a vow she would keep, even if it cost her everything. Morella woke to someone pounding on her door. Disoriented, she stumbled out of bed, her heart racing. Kieran was crying in his cradle, startled awake by the noise. "Miss Morella!" One of the guards burst in, his face pale. "There's been an attack. His Majesty needs you in the war room immediately. Bring the baby." Fear shot through her like ice water. What kind of attack? Assassins tried to breach the royal wing. They were searching for something, or someone. The guard's eyes flickered to Kieran. "We need to move you both to a secure location now." Morella snatched Kieran from his cradle, wrapping him hastily in blankets. He was still crying, frightened by the abrupt awakening and her own fear scent. "Shh, little one," she murmured, following the guard out into the corridor. "Shh, it's all right. I've got you." But her heart was pounding and her hands were shaking. The note had been right. Someone was hunting Kieran, and they'd already found him. The war room was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Thaddeus stood at the center, his shirt torn and bloodied, examining a map spread across the table. His eyes were glowing amber and his claws were fully extended. When he looked up and saw Morella with Kieran, some of the wildness faded from his expression. "Thank the gods," he breathed, striding toward her. "Are you both all right? They didn't reach your apartments?" "We're fine," Morella assured him, even though her voice was shaking. "The guards got us out in time. But what happened? Who were they?" "Professional killers. 5 of them managed to slip past the outer patrols." Thaddeus's jaw tightened, muscles bunching with barely controlled rage. "They headed straight for the royal wing, specifically toward your chambers. If my guards hadn't spotted them when they did." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "They were coming for Kieran," Morella whispered. "Yes, which means whoever left that note was telling the truth. Someone very powerful wants my nephew dead." Thaddeus reached out and gently touched Kieran's head, his expression softening. The baby had stopped crying and was staring up at him with wide amber eyes, but they underestimated how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine. Lord Vexmont hurried into the war room, his face pinched with worry, or perhaps annoyance. "Your Majesty, the intruders have all been killed or captured. But I must say, this entire situation is becoming untenable. Perhaps it would be wiser to send the child away, to a remote location where these assassins cannot find him. Keeping him here puts the entire palace at risk. No. Thaddeus's voice was flat, absolute. Kieran stays with me. Here, where I can protect him personally. But, Your Majesty, I said no, Vexmont. Thaddeus turned those glowing amber eyes on his advisor, and the smaller man actually took a step back. My nephew is not being shipped off to some remote fortress where I can't guarantee his safety. He's staying here, and I will deal with anyone who comes for him. Am I clear? Perfectly clear, Your Majesty. But Vexmont's eyes flickered to Morella, with barely concealed malice. She'd made an enemy today, she realized. The chief advisor saw her as a threat to his influence. After Vexmont left, Thaddeus ran a hand through his disheveled hair, looking suddenly exhausted. It was the first time Morella had seen him appear anything less than perfectly controlled. You're hurt, she said, noticing the blood on his shirt more clearly now. Let me help. It's nothing. Superficial wounds that are already healing. Please. Morella shifted Kieran to one arm and reached out with her free hand. Let me look, at least. For a moment she thought Thaddeus would refuse. Then something in his expression softened, and he nodded. My chambers are through there. He gestured to a door at the back of the war room. There's a medical kit in the bathing room. Morella followed him through to what were clearly the Alpha King's private apartments. They were surprisingly sparse, functional furniture, minimal decoration. A soldier's room, not a king's palace. In the bathing room, she set Kieran carefully in a padded basket and turned her attention to Thaddeus. He'd pulled off his ruined shirt, and Morella's breath caught. She'd known he was muscular. She'd seen the evidence through his clothes. But seeing him bare-chested was something else entirely. He was magnificent. Broad shoulders and massive arms corded with muscle. A chest that looked like it had been carved from marble. And abs that formed a perfect ladder down to the waistband of his pants. Old scars crisscrossed his torso, proof of countless battles survived, and through it all she could see the faint shimmer of his wolf just beneath the surface, making him seem more than human. Something primal and powerful and utterly captivating. The wounds are on my back, Thaddeus said quietly, and Morella realized she'd been staring. Right. Of course. She grabbed the medical kit with shaking hands and moved behind him. 3 long gashes crossed his shoulder blades, claw marks from one of the assassins, she guessed. They were already starting to close thanks to his alpha healing, but they still looked painful. Morella cleaned the wounds with gentle efficiency, trying to ignore the heat radiating off Thaddeus's skin and the way his muscles flexed under her touch. This was medical care, she told herself firmly. Nothing more. You're good at this, Thaddeus said after a moment. Where did you learn? I worked in the pack healer's tent before I came here, Morella explained, applying salve to the cleaned wounds. I wasn't allowed to train officially. Half-breeds aren't permitted to become full healers, but I picked up what I could. Half-breed, Thaddeus's voice had gone hard. I hate that term, as if having 2 different wolf bloodlines somehow makes you less rather than more. Morella blinked in surprise. Most alphas don't feel that way. Most alphas are idiots. He turned to face her, and suddenly they were very close in the small bathing room. His amber eyes held hers. Your father was from the mountain packs, wasn't he? I can smell the highland frost in your bloodline. And your mother was Riverland Pack. I'd recognize that water scent anywhere. That makes you one of maybe a dozen wolves in the kingdom who can trace lineage to both mountain and river territories. That's not something to be ashamed of, Morella. That's power. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. For her entire life, being half-breed had meant being lesser, unwanted, barely tolerated. But Thaddeus was looking at her like she was something rare and valuable. I never thought of it that way, she said softly. Then start. His hand came up to cup her cheek, just as it had earlier, but this time, his thumb traced slowly across her cheekbone, a caress rather than just a touch. You are so much more than what those fools in your old pack told you. I've known you less than a day, and I can already see your strength, your courage, your compassion. You're remarkable, Morella." Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he must be able to hear it. His face was inches from hers, his eyes glowing in the dim light, and the heat between them was almost overwhelming. Then Kieran made a small, fussy sound from his basket, and the spell broke. Thaddeus stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get some rest. It's nearly dawn, and we have a long day ahead of us tomorrow." "Yes," Morella agreed, though her voice came out breathless. "Yes, of course." But as Thaddeus walked her back to her apartments with a full escort of guards, Morella couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd touched her, the way his voice had gone soft when he'd called her remarkable. She was playing with fire, she knew. Alpha Kings didn't mate with half-breed kitchen omegas. That was a fairy tale, not reality. But when she closed her eyes that night, she dreamed of amber eyes and gentle touches, and her heart ached with wanting something she knew she could never have. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Thaddeus had interrogated the captured assassins personally, a process Morella didn't ask about, and learned that they'd been hired through an intermediary. Someone with deep pockets and connections to the criminal underworld wanted Kieran dead, but the killers didn't know who. Meanwhile, Morella fell into a routine caring for Kieran. Thessaly came 3 times a day for feedings, and between times, Morella learned to change linens, soothe crying, and recognize the difference between hungry fussing and tired fussing. She'd never been responsible for an infant before. It was exhausting and terrifying and absolutely wonderful. But the best parts of her days were the hours when Thaddeus would visit. He came every evening after court, still dressed in his formal clothes, and would sit with Kieran for at least an hour. He'd hold the baby with such careful tenderness, talking to him in a low voice about his day, or telling stories about Dane, Thaddeus's brother who Kieran would never get to meet. And while Thaddeus focused on his nephew, Morella would find herself watching him, memorizing the way lamplight caught in his dark hair, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when Kieran grabbed his finger, the rare smile that transformed his harsh features into something breathtaking. She was falling for him. Despite knowing it was hopeless, despite all her best intentions, Morella was falling hopelessly in love with the Alpha King. It was on the 5th evening that everything changed. Thaddeus had arrived earlier than usual, looking troubled. He'd held Kieran for a while in silence, then finally spoken. "I found records of Dane in the Eastern Territories," he said quietly. "Medical reports from a border outpost dated 6 months after his supposed death. He survived the battle, Morella. He lived for at least 2 more years." "That's wonderful," Morella said. "Isn't it?" "I don't know." Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "Because if Dane was alive, why didn't he contact me? Why didn't he come home? We weren't just brothers. We were best friends. We shared everything. The idea that he was out there somewhere, alive, and never sent word." His voice cracked. "It doesn't make sense." Morella moved to sit beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. She didn't have words that could fix this, but she could offer presence, solidarity. "Maybe he couldn't," she said softly. "Maybe something prevented him from reaching out. The note said Kieran's mother was killed by people trying to destroy your bloodline. Maybe Dane was hiding from them. Maybe he stayed away to protect you." Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to look at her, and the raw emotion in his amber eyes made her chest ache. "How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Make everything seem less unbearable. Make me feel like I'm not drowning." He shifted Kieran to one arm and reached out with his free hand to brush a strand of hair back from Morella's face. "You have no idea what you've come to mean to me, do you?" Morella's breath caught. "Your Majesty, Thaddeus. My name is Thaddeus, and I need to hear you say it." "Thaddeus," she whispered, and something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice dropping to a rough rumble. "Every moment I'm not here, I'm counting down the minutes until I can come back." When I fought those assassins, all I could think about was getting to you and Kieran in time. You've become essential to me, Morella. You and this little one. You're my family now." Tears stung Morella's eyes. "You don't mean that. You're grateful, and you're processing grief, and I mean every word." Thaddeus cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "I know this is fast. I know it probably seems insane, but I've lived long enough to recognize something real when I find it, and this, what I feel when I'm with you, this is the most real thing I've experienced in 3 years." "But I'm nobody," Morella protested, even as her heart soared with hope. "I'm a half-breed Omega with no family, no status, nothing to offer a king." "You're wrong." Thaddeus leaned closer until his forehead rested against hers. "You're brave and compassionate and selfless. You put yourself in danger to save an infant you'd never met. You see past titles and power to the person underneath. And you make me want to be worthy of the way you look at me." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You're everything, Morella. And if you'll have me, if you'll accept this broken Alpha King with all his scars and failings, I would be honored to call you mine." Morella's tears spilled over. "I'm already yours," she whispered back. "I think I have been since the moment you knelt before me in the throne room and asked to hold Kieran." The smile that broke across Thaddeus's face was like sunrise after a long night. He closed the final distance between them and kissed her. It was gentle at first, reverent, as if he was afraid she might break. But when Morella kissed him back, when she reached up to tangle her fingers in his dark hair and pressed closer, the kiss deepened into something hungry and claiming. Thaddeus growled low in his throat, the sound purely wolf, and Morella felt answering heat flood through her. This was her mate, her alpha, and every instinct in her body was screaming at her to submit, to offer, to bond. But Kieran chose that moment to make an unhappy sound, reminding them both that they had an audience. Thaddeus pulled back with a breathless laugh. "Someone's jealous of my attention," he said, looking down at his nephew. "Don't worry, little one. There's plenty of love to go around." Morella wiped her eyes, laughing through her tears. "This is insane. You know that, right? The court will never accept it. A kitchen Omega and an Alpha King." "Then the court can choke on their objections," Thaddeus said firmly. "You're my mate, Morella. I claim you before the gods and the moon. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." His eyes glowed amber. "And I promise you, that's not a conversation they'll enjoy." But even as joy flooded through her, Morella felt a thread of worry. "The note," she said. "The person who left it. They said they were someone you'd forgotten. And they're clearly still watching. What if claiming me publicly puts a target on my back?" "It might," Thaddeus admitted. "But I'm not going to hide you or pretend you don't matter to me. That would put you in more danger, not less. No, we're going to do this properly. Tomorrow I'll announce our mating bond to the court. Then we'll triple the guards around these apartments and set a trap for whoever's been orchestrating these attacks. We're going on the offensive." "Tomorrow?" Morella's voice came out as a squeak. "That's so soon." "Not soon enough for my wolf." Thaddeus's eyes were blazing now, his canines extending slightly. "I want you marked and mated and bound to me in every way possible. I want the entire kingdom to know you're under my protection. I want—" He broke off, taking a deep breath and visibly controlling himself. "I'm sorry. I'm coming on too strong. If you need more time—" "I don't," Morella said quickly. "I'm scared, yes, but I don't need more time to know what I want. I want you, Thaddeus. I want this family we're building. I want everything." The kiss he gave her then was searing, claiming a promise of everything to come. The next morning, Morella dressed with shaking hands in the finest gown from the trunks Thaddeus had sent, a deep sapphire blue that brought out the unusual violet tones in her eyes. Thessaly had come by early to help with her hair, weaving it into an intricate braid crown that made her look almost regal. "The whole palace is buzzing," Thessaly said as she worked. "Rumors are flying about why the Alpha King called an emergency court session. Some say he's announcing a war. Others say he's naming Kieran as his official heir." "Something like that," Morella murmured, her stomach churning with nerves. When she was ready, she bundled Kieran carefully and made her way down to the throne room with her guard escort. The space was packed even fuller than it had been on her first visit, nobles craning their necks to see what was happening. Thaddeus stood on the dais, magnificent in formal black and silver. When his eyes found Morella in the crowd, they lit up with unmistakable warmth and pride. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space, "I have called you here today to make several announcements. First, I can confirm that the child known as Kieran Dane Blackwater is indeed my nephew, the only surviving son of my brother Dane. He will be raised as a prince of this realm and heir to the Crescent Throne, should I die without children of my own." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but no one dared object. "Second," Thaddeus continued, "I am increasing security throughout the palace, effective immediately. We have received credible threats against the royal line, and I will not tolerate any risk to my family." More murmurs, these ones worried. "And third?" Thaddeus descended from the dais and walked directly to Morella. The crowd parted before him like water. When he reached her, he took Kieran gently from her arms and passed him to one of the guards, then took both of Morella's hands in his. "I wish to announce that I have found my mate." The throne room exploded in shocked gasps and whispered conversations. Morella felt hundreds of eyes on her, judging, calculating. "This is Morella," Thaddeus said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She is brave and compassionate, and she saved my nephew's life at great personal risk. She is also the woman who has captured my heart completely. As of this moment, she is my chosen mate, and will be treated with all the respect and honor due to a future queen. Anyone who speaks against her, threatens her, or treats her with anything less than absolute respect will answer to me. Is that clear?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the nobles began to bow, some grudgingly, some with genuine respect, but all of them acknowledging the Alpha King's decree. Lord Vexmont looked like he'd swallowed glass, but even he managed a stiff bow. Thaddeus turned back to Morella, his amber eyes soft. "Do you accept this claim?" he asked, and she realized he was giving her a choice even now, even after his public declaration. "Do you accept me as your mate and Alpha?" Morella's answer came from the deepest part of her soul. "Yes. Now and always. Yes." Thaddeus pulled her close and kissed her in front of the entire court, a claiming that left no doubt in anyone's mind who she belonged to. Morella kissed him back, pouring 3 years of loneliness and a lifetime of feeling invisible into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, the throne room erupted in applause. Some of it genuine, some of it merely politic, but all of it acknowledging the reality of the bond. "My queen," Thaddeus murmured against her lips, and Morella's heart soared. The formal mating ceremony was held 3 days later in the palace's ancient bonding chamber. It was a private affair, just Morella, Thaddeus, Kieran, a few trusted guards, and the pack elder who would officiate. Morella wore white silk that Thaddeus had commissioned specially for her, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that represented both mountain and river pack traditions, a deliberate honoring of her dual heritage. When the elder asked if Thaddeus accepted Morella as his mate in all ways, heart, body, and soul, his answer rang out clear and absolute. "I do. Before the gods and the moon, I claim her as mine." And when the elder asked if Morella accepted Thaddeus, she didn't hesitate. "I do. Before the gods and the moon, I am his." The bonding bite was intimate and intense. Thaddeus cradled her against his massive chest, one hand supporting her head, and sank his canines into the junction of her neck and shoulder. The pain was sharp and bright, but it transformed almost immediately into waves of pleasure and rightness as the mate bond snapped into place. Morella gasped as she felt Thaddeus's emotions flood through the new connection. His fierce, protective love, his deep satisfaction, his barely controlled desire. She could feel his wolf now, could sense the primal alpha that lived beneath his kingly exterior, and it recognized her as mate, as pack, as essential. When it was her turn to mark him, a symbolic bite without the force to truly pierce his thick alpha skin, Thaddeus growled in approval and pulled her into a kiss that made her knees weak. "Mine," he rumbled against her lips. "Finally, completely mine." "Yours," Morella agreed breathlessly. "Always yours." That night, Thaddeus carried her to his chambers. Her chambers now, too, she realized with a thrill, and they consummated the bond properly. He was gentle and patient despite his obvious hunger, taking his time to learn what she liked, how to make her gasp and arch and call his name. And when they finally came together, when the bond blazed between them like the sun, Morella felt truly complete for the first time in her life. "I love you," Thaddeus murmured afterward, holding her close with her head pillowed on his massive chest. "I know we moved fast, but I need you to know. This isn't just instinct or convenience. I love you, Morella. Every stubborn, brave, beautiful part of you." "I love you too," Morella whispered back, tracing the scars across his chest. "My alpha, my mate, my king." He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "Just Thaddeus when we're alone. Always just Thaddeus to you." They fell asleep tangled together, and Morella dreamed of amber eyes, and gentle strength, and a future she'd never dared to imagine. But of course their happiness couldn't last uninterrupted. Reality came crashing back 5 days after the mating ceremony. Morella was in the nursery with Kieran when Thaddeus burst in, his expression grim. "We caught someone trying to breach the palace wards," he said without preamble. "Morella, you need to see this. You need to hear what they said." Fear shot through her. "Who was it?" "Someone from your old pack." Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "Someone who claims to know who left the note about Kieran." They brought Kieran with them down to the dungeons, surrounded by guards. The prisoner was being held in a secure cell with silver-enforced bars. When Morella saw who it was, she gasped. "Cedric?" The man chained to the wall looked up, and Morella barely recognized him. Cedric had been one of the few people in her old pack who'd been kind to her, a warrior who'd never treated her differently for being half-breed. But the man before her now looked gaunt and desperate, with wild eyes and scratches covering his arms. "Morella," Cedric breathed. "Thank the gods. I was so afraid I wouldn't get to you in time." "In time for what?" Thaddeus demanded, moving protectively in front of Morella. "What do you know about the threats against my nephew?" "Everything." Cedric's eyes flickered to Kieran, then back to Thaddeus. "I know who wants him dead. I know why. And I know who your mysterious note writer is." "Talk," Thaddeus commanded, his alpha power making the word a compulsion. "Now." "The person behind the assassination attempts is Lord Vexmont," Cedric said, and Morella's blood ran cold. "He's been plotting against the royal line for years, ever since you refused to make him your second. When Prince Dane died, or supposedly died, Vexmont saw an opportunity. If he could eliminate you without an heir, he could claim the throne through his distant bloodline connection." Thaddeus's hands clenched into fists, his claws extending. "Continue." "Prince Dane didn't die in the border wars. He was badly injured and left for dead, but he survived. He made it to a small village in the Eastern Territories, where he met a healer named Lissa. They fell in love. She was pregnant with Kieran when Vexmont's assassins found them." Morella's arms tightened around Kieran. "How do you know all this?" "Because Lisa was my sister," Cedric said, his voice breaking. "She sent me letters describing Dane, and I recognized him from the descriptions. I tried to warn her to come here, to seek the Alpha King's protection, but she was afraid. Dane had made her promise not to contact the palace until they were sure it was safe. He thought the threat was coming from a rival pack, not from within the court itself." "Gods," Thaddeus breathed. "Vexmont killed my brother." "Yes, 3 months ago, his assassins finally tracked them down. Dane fought to protect Lysa and give her time to escape with Kieran, but Cedric's voice broke. He died in her arms. Lysa managed to get away with the baby, but she was badly wounded. She made it as far as the palace before she succumbed to her injuries. Then who left the note? Morella asked. Who brought Kieran to the kitchens? That was me, said a new voice. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway to the dungeons was an elderly woman Morella had seen around the palace, but never really noticed. One of the ancient servants who'd been working in the palace since before Thaddeus was born. Helena? Thaddeus's eyes widened. You were my father's head of household. And I've served the Blackwater line for 50 years, Helena said, stepping forward with more grace than her apparent age suggested. I found Lysa in the lower corridors, bleeding and desperate. She told me everything before she died. About Dane, about Kieran, about Vexmont's treachery. She begged me to get her baby to safety. Why didn't you bring him directly to me? Thaddeus asked. Because I didn't know who to trust. Vexmont has spies everywhere in this palace. If I'd walked into your throne room openly, the child would have been dead within hours. Helena looked at Morella with something like approval. But I remembered this one. The half-breed Omega who'd stood up to the head cook 3 months ago when he was beating a younger servant. You put yourself in danger to protect someone weaker. I knew if anyone would risk everything to save an innocent child, it would be you. Tears stung Morella's eyes. So you left him where you knew I would find him. And you did exactly what I hoped. You brought him to the Alpha King, and you stayed to protect him. Helena smiled. You saved the Blackwater line, child. Never doubt that. Thaddeus turned to his head guard. Arrest Lord Vexmont immediately. Charge him with treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and the deaths of Prince Dane and Lysa. I want him in these dungeons within the hour. The guard saluted and hurried off. What about me? Cedric asked quietly. I tried to breach the palace wards. That's a crime. You were trying to deliver a warning, Thaddeus said, and you've given me the truth I needed to finally get justice for my brother. You'll be released and given quarters in the palace as my guest. His expression softened slightly. Your sister saved my nephew's life, Cedric. She's a hero. I won't dishonor her memory by punishing the only family she had left. Relief flooded Cedric's face. Thank you, Your Majesty. Lord Vexmont was arrested in his chambers, surrounded by documents that proved his conspiracy. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he confessed everything. His plot to eliminate the royal line, his network of assassins, even his role in staging the border battle where Dane had supposedly died. The trial was swift and public. The execution was even more so. Morella didn't attend. She stayed in the nursery with Kieran, holding him close and whispering stories about his parents. Brave Dane, who'd protected his family until the end, and Lysa, who'd fought through mortal injuries to save her son. When Thaddeus returned that evening, he looked exhausted but grimly satisfied. It's over, he said, sinking onto the couch beside Morella. Vexmont is dead. His conspirators are being rounded up, and I've appointed new advisors I actually trust. The threat to Kieran is ended. Morella leaned against his shoulder, feeling the tension drain from her own body. What happens now? Now? Thaddeus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Now we live. We raise Kieran together. We build a family and a court based on truth and honor instead of schemes and treachery. He tilted her face up to kiss her softly. Now we get our happy ending. Just like that? Morella asked, smiling through sudden tears. Just like that, Thaddeus confirmed. Although, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. There is one more thing I want to make official. He opened the box to reveal a ring, a stunning band of silver and moonstone that caught the lamplight and seemed to glow from within. This was my mother's, Thaddeus said quietly. The mate ring she wore for 50 years of marriage to my father. I want you to have it, Morella. Not because you need jewelry or status symbols, but because you deserve to know that you're not just my mate. You're my queen in every sense that matters. You're the woman I choose to rule beside me, to build a future with, to love until my last breath." Morella was crying openly now. "Yes," she managed to say through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." Thaddeus slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her deeply, while Kieran made happy, gurgling sounds from his cradle. "I love you," Thaddeus murmured against her lips. "My brave, beautiful mate. My queen." "I love you too," Morella whispered back. "My alpha. My king. My home." And in that moment, surrounded by the family she'd built from tragedy and hope, Morella finally understood what it meant to belong. Not because of her bloodline or her status, but because of her courage, her compassion, and her willingness to risk everything for those who needed her. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, valued, loved. She was home. 6 months later, Morella stood in the palace gardens watching Thaddeus play with Kieran, now a chubby, laughing baby who adored his uncle with every fiber of his being. The sight of the massive Alpha King lying on the grass making silly faces while Kieran giggled and grabbed at his hair made her heart swell with joy. "Your Majesty?" Morella turned to find Helena standing nearby, a knowing smile on her ancient face. "Just Morella," she corrected gently. "You know I prefer it. Old habits." Helena moved to stand beside her, watching Thaddeus and Kieran. "You've done well, child. Better than I even hoped." "Thanks to you," Morella said. "If you hadn't trusted me with Kieran that night—" "I trusted your heart," Helena interrupted. "And your heart hasn't disappointed. You brought this family back together. You gave the Alpha King a reason to live again. That's powerful magic, even for someone who claims no special gifts." Morella touched the mate mark on her neck, now fully healed into a beautiful silvery scar. Through the bond, she could feel Thaddeus's contentment, his love, his utter satisfaction with his life. "I'm pregnant," she said suddenly, the words surprising even herself. She'd only confirmed it that morning with the palace healer. "I haven't told Thaddeus yet. I was waiting for the right moment." Helena's smile widened. "Then I suspect the right moment is now." She left Morella alone in the garden, and after a moment Morella made her way across the grass to where her mate and nephew were playing. "Thaddeus?" she said softly. He looked up immediately, his amber eyes warm. "What is it, love?" "I have something to tell you. Something important." Thaddeus handed Kieran to one of the nearby guards and stood, concern flickering across his face. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. Everything is—" Morella took his hands, placing them on her still flat stomach. "Everything is perfect. We're going to have a baby, Thaddeus. You're going to be a father." For a moment he just stared at her. Then his face transformed with such pure joy that Morella's eyes filled with tears. "A baby," he breathed. "We're having a baby?" "Yes, in about 7 months, if the healer is correct." Thaddeus let out a whoop of celebration and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and held on tight. "You're pregnant," he said, setting her down carefully but keeping his arms around her. "You're carrying our child." "Gods, Morella, you're the most amazing woman in the world." "I had some help," she teased, and he laughed, that rare, beautiful laugh that still made her heart skip. "I love you," Thaddeus said, cupping her face with such gentleness despite his massive hands. "I love you more than I have words to express. You saved my nephew. You saved me, and now you're giving us another child to love and protect. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Morella corrected, rising on her toes to kiss him. "The day I found Kieran was the day our real lives began." "Then I'll bless that day for the rest of my life," Thaddeus murmured against her lips. "And I'll spend every one of those days making sure you never regret trusting me with your heart." "Never," Morella promised. "Not for a single second." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms while Kieran babbled happily nearby. The sun was setting over the palace gardens, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The same color as Thaddeus's eyes, Morella thought. 7 months ago, she'd been nobody. A half-breed kitchen omega that people looked through instead of at. Now she was a queen, a mother, a mate to the most powerful alpha in the realm. She had a family who loved her, a child who needed her, and a future bright with possibilities. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was valued. She was loved. She was home. And as Thaddeus kissed her again, while their nephew laughed and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of promise, Morella knew that some fairy tales really did come true. Not because of magic or destiny or fate, but because of courage, compassion, and the willingness to fight for the ones you loved. That was the real power. That was the real happy ending. And it was only just beginning.